Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. So we left off with the quote-unquote end of the scramble for Africa in the last video with 1914, which is the start of World War I. So this brings us back to West and Central or Equatorial Africa with regards to the French. So before this point in time, Cameroon and Togo had been territories of the German colonial empire. During World War I, of course, these were quickly absorbed and taken over mostly by the French. There were a few sections of Cameroon and German Togo that were split up and also given to neighboring British colonies like Nigeria and Ghana. Now, this is, in World War I, there wasn't much happening in West Africa. It's more about what sort of happens in World War II. But in World War I, this just showed a further expansion of French influence in West Africa because, again, they hated that there was anyone there who could potentially rival them, which, of course, was Germany, which they didn't like at the time. So not much happens, and then we get to World War II, and with the fall of France and the establishment of the puppet Vichy regime. During this point in time, the Vichy regime got to enjoy the loyalty of North Africa and West Africa. But it was Equatorial Africa, the one that included French Congo, Gabon, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, and Chad, that was loyal to Free France. And this would prove to be a huge boon to Free French forces because it tied up French colonial forces in West Africa that otherwise would have been free to perhaps be moved elsewhere. Now, one of the biggest architects and allies of World War II, who we do not talk about, and I should probably do a video on him on his own in the future at some point, was a man from Central Africa, but by like this I mean the territorial region, named Félix Éboué. And there's this very famous picture of him welcoming Charles de Gaulle to Chad as, oh yes, welcome, here we are, loyal Free French forces. So I will tell more about this man in his own independent video, but I want to talk about World War II and what this meant for France in general and for French West Africa and Equatorial Africa. So with the ultimate end of World War II, and what ends up happening is after the Allies invade North Africa, in especially Morocco and in Algeria, that largely cuts off Vichy France from any kind of influence they may have in West Africa, which swiftly falls to Free French forces afterwards. So there wasn't too much bloodshed. There were a few battles here and there, but not incredibly violent campaigns like those in North Africa that are made famous in World War II history. But it's what comes after World War II that makes for the interesting story. So even though it was good of Félix Éboué to support the Free French after World War II, France also finds itself in this problem. It is now a destroyed nation, like physically destroyed, and needs to rebuild itself. And it also owes some of its support and liberty to French colonials in parts of Africa. And now they realize, our hold on these areas is tenuous at best now. So how do we fix this? And this is where a bunch of post-war events and doctrines start to come into play. But what isn't talked about too much in terms of the colonial period is that ostensibly the Western powers, the United Nations, had fought against imperialism because it wasn't right when the Germans and the Italians did it, but when they did it, it was fine. But this was sort of the message that came across. And so after World War II is what's known as the period of decolonialization. And for some, it goes better than others. And for the French, it gets really complicated and arguably very dark. And that's why we're going to leave that for tomorrow's video. But the fact that France, still to this day, owes some of its support and liberty to Free French forces in Africa who bravely fought and died alongside Frenchmen. Do you want to know how they were thanked in the Liberation of Paris parade when that was rolling through? They came at the very end, when most people would be gone and most people wouldn't care to see black people marching through the streets of a white city. That's how the French decided to thank people who fought and died and supported their belief in liberty, equality, and fraternity. Liberté, égalité, et fraternité. But only for white people, apparently. Not for the free French in Africa who helped fight and die for the Allied cause. And the fact that we ignore this and don't acknowledge this part of history and incredible leaders like Félix Éboué is what's bothering me today.